I still fondly remember the days of my childhood going to my local video rental store with my mom and looking at the games they had, hoping I'd be able to play something new and interesting that week. One of the games I began to see week after week was called Kingdom Hearts, and to be honest, I wasn't super interested in it at first. Of all people, it was actually my mom that got into it. She wanted to try it after hearing that it was heavily Disney themed, so one day she rented it for herself and brought it home. She instantly became a fan, and after watching her play it started to drag me in too. I still remember how, after having rented it multiple times, we finally just went to the store to buy it and the official strategy guide, and then she started a brand new game just so that I could see the beginning. I would watch her play and read the guide out loud so we could find all the cool secrets, and she would even let me stay up late whenever she was playing so I could watch. I would go on to play this game for myself over and over throughout the years, and I obviously wasn't the only one. Over the next 2 decades, this one-shot story blossomed into a series spanning over 10 games with more on the way. Against all expectations, Kingdom Hearts quickly became one of the most popular game series of all time. And yet, there is one piece of criticism that I've heard over and over every step of the way for almost 20 years. It's too confusing, it's too complex, it's too convoluted. Ladies and gentlemen, it's 2022. Storytelling has been evolving constantly, and we as an audience have been evolving with it. If your mom could follow daytime dramas like Days of Our Lives, you can understand Kingdom Hearts. It really isn't that complicated. But as much as my Chad brain would like to tell you all to just get good and try again, this isn't something that can just be swept under the rug. This same piece of criticism comes from lovers and haters of the series alike, as well as people who've never even played one of these games. So there has to be a nugget of truth to this somewhere, right? Well, kind of. There are 2 main problems the Kingdom Hearts series has faced that created all of this confusion. It was widely inaccessible, and it had a terrible naming scheme. The super important takeaway here right from the very start is that both of these problems are completely external. The problems didn't lie with the content of the games, just with how they were presented to us in the real world. Let's take them one at a time. When you talk about accessibility issues with video games, you probably think of companies not manufacturing enough physical copies of the game to meet demand, or of a game not being available in certain areas of the world. Well, in this case, it wasn't about how many copies were being made or where they were being sent, it was about what consoles they were being released for. Kingdom Hearts was originally released exclusively on PlayStation 2, so you'd think that all future games in the series would also be released on PlayStation consoles at the very least, and you'd be wrong. 2 years later, the direct sequel to Kingdom Hearts for PlayStation 2 was released on Nintendo's Game Boy Advance. The next and only other game to release for PlayStation 2 was the 3rd game in the series, and to understand it completely, you had to have played that Game Boy Advance game first. Meaning that not only did you have to have that second console to continue the story, you also had to keep up with the series, or with Game Boy releases in general, well enough to even know that this Game Boy game existed. I actually have a friend in real life who fell into this trap. He didn't know there was a Game Boy game. He just played Kingdom Hearts 1 and then moved on to the next game for PlayStation 2, and he didn't understand it. His confusion wasn't necessarily due to the quality of the story itself, it was just because of Square Enix's poor decision making when it came to releasing these games. Now, most people would see a problem like this and take it as a learning experience. Unfortunately for us, Square isn't most people. They doubled down on it. Let's quickly go through each game in the series and I'll tell you what console they are released for. PlayStation 2, Game Boy Advance, PlayStation 2, Nintendo DS, Mobile/Nintendo DS, PlayStation Portable, Nintendo 3DS, Mobile, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, and finally, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. Yes, you heard that correctly. To play the series as it was released, you had to have access to at least 6 different consoles and a smartphone. And yes, each game is necessary for understanding the complete picture. No wonder people get confused. Most people would be lucky to have half of these consoles, and even then they'd probably still miss out on most of these games. As infuriating as this is, and as much as I'd love to forget about it, we have to keep this in mind going forward, which leads us to the second detriment of the series. Square Enix did a terrible job when they picked the names for these games. There's just no sugarcoating it. Previously, I tried to avoid using names to focus on those console issues, but now we can dive into them, so let's start at the beginning. The first 3 games in the series, in a random order, are Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories, Kingdom Hearts 2, and Kingdom Hearts. If I asked you to put them in order solely based on their names, where would you put them? I'd bet most people would say the order is Kingdom Hearts, then Kingdom Hearts 2 comes second, and Chain of Memories is a side story that could go anywhere. In fact, I know this is what most people would say because this is exactly what they did say when these games were new. But if you were paying attention earlier, you'd know that the correct order is Kingdom Hearts, then Chain of Memories, then Kingdom Hearts 2. These games directly continue from each other, so they have to be played in this order, but you wouldn't know that from the names. Most people these days understand that when parts of a series have numbers, those tend to be the main parts of the story, and names with subtitles tend to be additive pieces that expand on the series but aren't necessary to understanding the main numbered titles. In the case of Kingdom Hearts, the numbered entries are still considered the main pieces of the story, but it mostly comes down to these games featuring the main protagonist, Sora, and his 2 companions, Donald and Goofy, while the other titles feature other characters. Those other titles are just as important to the story, they just don't focus on this specific group of characters. Just imagine for a moment Star Wars Episodes 1, 2, and 3, but it's cut down to only the parts with Anakin Skywalker on screen. Everything else is thrown into movies with names like Star Wars, Red vs. Blue, and Green. The prequel trilogy exists to tell the story of Anakin Skywalker, yes, but if you skip everything else in between, you miss a ton of context for what's happening and those mainline entries won't make sense. Now let's take these 2 problems outlined and mash them together. You're happily playing the series, but you miss the 3DS title because you don't know it exists. Or you purposefully skip it because it doesn't sound important and then get lost during the next game. Or you know it's important but can't play it because you don't have a 3DS. Or you do play it but it doesn't make any sense because you missed one of the previous games. There's just so much opportunity to get lost in the series because Square did a really poor job with how they released it. But again, these are all external factors that don't have anything to do with the actual story being told in the games. Does Kingdom Hearts have a story that gets complex or convoluted at times? Yeah, of course it does. There's over 10 games in the series, so of course there's a lot to remember and nuances to keep in mind, but it's the same for any long-running story. A 10-season show like Game of Thrones gets wild the longer it goes, but it isn't too hard to follow when you're watching every episode in order from start to finish. The problem is that Kingdom Hearts historically made it hard to do that, so most of the criticism towards the story comes from people who, essentially in this example, watched Season 1, then skipped to Season 3, then 6, and then complain when the ending doesn't make sense. Of course it doesn't, you miss the parts that explain what's happening. So now that we've thoroughly established what the criticism is and the actual problem here, how do we get around it? Is there a fix? Do you just have to buy a bunch of consoles and look up a guide online to be able to experience the games correctly? Thankfully, the answer is incredibly simple. In 2013, Square Enix finally did us a solid and started releasing these games in remastered collections, and now every single game is available for current gen on PlayStation, Xbox, and PC, with support currently rolling out to Nintendo Switch. These collections order the games for you so you always know what to play next, and can be bundled together to save you some serious money. The Kingdom Hearts All-in-One package for PlayStation lets you experience every game in the series, excluding the newest game, for a cool $100 US, and I see it go on sale 50% off fairly often. I bought these collections individually as they came out so I could play on current gen, and it cost me well over $200. Considering that you're getting 10 games, you really can't beat that kind of value. So to sum up this whole rant, Kingdom Hearts is not that complicated. It just suffered from some barriers to entry that thankfully don't exist anymore. If you are someone that has ever been even slightly interested in this series, but held off because you heard how complicated it was, please reconsider giving the series a try now. It's about as accessible as it could possibly be, and there's truly never been a better time to jump in. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for sticking around. I truly do appreciate it. As you can probably tell, this is a topic I'm pretty passionate about, and I've been wanting to make a video like this for a while now. So please let me know what you think about this video essay type content, and remember to subscribe to catch future videos. Again, thanks so much for watching, and until we meet again, may your heart be your guiding key.